The city lights glowed faintly as the evening settled in. A cool breeze moved through the streets carrying the smell of roasted food and busy kitchens. Inside one of the most respected restaurants in town, the atmosphere was alive with chatter, clinking glasses and laughter. But no one in the crowded room knew that the most important person in the building had just walked through the door. He did not enter like a proud owner. He did not carry the look of wealth or power. Instead, he wore plain clothes, a cap pulled low over his forehead, and simple shoes that blended him in with the crowd. His name was Señor Alvarez, a man who had built this restaurant with his own hands years ago. But tonight he wanted to see it through the eyes of an ordinary guest. He wanted to know the truth about how his staff behaved when they thought no one important was watching. The owner had been hearing small whispers, complaints from regular customers, small rumors that the service was not as warm as it once was. But no one dared to say these things openly to him. Proud and polished faces always appeared when the boss was present. So he made a choice. He would become invisible. He would disguise himself as a common worker, a tired laborer, and sit quietly among strangers. When he entered the restaurant, no heads turned. No one rushed to greet him with the usual false charm reserved for wealthy men. Instead, he walked slowly to a corner table where the light was dim. Only one person noticed him, a young waitress with tired eyes but a kind smile. She carried her notepad gently and walked toward him as if he were no less important than the rich couple laughing at the other table. "Good evening, sir. What would you like tonight?" she asked softly. Her voice calm, though her face showed signs of stress. Alvarez raised his head slightly. Studying her carefully, he saw no hint of arrogance, no impatience, only a quiet politeness. "Just meat," he replied simply, his voice low and plain. The young waitress blinked. Surprised by the unusual request, meat was not cheap here. Most ordinary customers ordered soup or bread, but she nodded without question. "Of course, sir. I will bring it right away," she said, writing it down as she walked away. He noticed two other waiters whispering to each other. Glancing at him with smirks, they laughed under their breath. One shook his head as if to say, "This man cannot pay." The disguised owner kept his face calm, but inside he felt his chest grow heavy. He was beginning to see what his customers had seen. The minutes stretched slowly as he waited. He let his eyes wander across the restaurant. The chandeliers glimmered, the dishes sparkled, but beneath the beauty he sensed something hollow. Workers rushing with forced smiles, some ignoring tables until called twice, others treating guests based on the clothes they wore. It was painful to watch. Finally, the young waitress returned, placing the plate of meat gently before him. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the fork down. "Here you go, sir. I hope it is to your liking," she whispered. He studied her again, this time noticing more. Her apron was clean but patched at the edges. Her shoes looked worn, and though she tried to smile, her eyes were heavy with worry. She stood for a moment too long, as if she wanted to say something more, then quickly turned away before he could ask. Alvarez cut into the meat slowly, pretending to be an ordinary guest, but his mind was sharp. He noticed the waitress returning often to check his table even when others called for her. He noticed the way her lips pressed tightly together when another waiter mocked him again. She pretended not to hear, but her fingers clenched around the tray she carried. Something inside him stirred, a question that grew louder with every passing moment. Why did she look so troubled? Why did her kindness seem mixed with silent fear? He decided not to reveal himself yet. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, letting the room move around him, waiting for the truth to show itself. The night grew heavier. Laughter echoed from the tables filled with wealthy guests, but his attention stayed fixed on the waitress. She moved with quiet strength, serving with care even as others pushed past her. He wondered what secret she carried in her heart, what burden weighed down her young shoulders. And then, as she returned to check on him once more, her hand brushed against the table, and something small and folded slipped beneath his plate. Her eyes flickered up for only a second, filled with silent pleading, then she turned quickly away, her steps fast as if she feared someone would notice. Alvarez's pulse quickened. His hand reached for the folded paper. His disguise suddenly felt heavier than before. The room around him blurred, and though he had no idea what was written inside, he already knew one thing. This night was about to change everything. The folded piece of paper rested under his plate, hidden from every curious eye. Señor Alvarez sat still, his hand hovering above it, his heart heavy with questions. The restaurant around him hummed with chatter and music, but to him the world had gone strangely silent. He glanced quickly to see where the young waitress had gone. She stood near the counter, busy with another order, her face calm though her eyes shifted nervously from time to time. It was clear she wanted him to read the message but feared anyone else would notice. Slowly, he lifted the note, careful not to draw attention. The paper was thin, slightly crumpled, written in hurried strokes. When he unfolded it beneath the dim light, his eyes locked on the words, "Please forgive me, sir. I don't know who else to trust. My life is in danger. I am trapped here, and I don't know how to escape. If you can help me, please do not let anyone know I gave this to you." Alvarez's breath caught in his throat. The words pierced him like a blade. He read them again, disbelief mixing with anger. This was not a casual complaint. It was a cry for help, written with desperation. His hands trembled as he folded the paper back, slipping it into his pocket quickly. He leaned back, forcing himself to appear calm. Inside, his thoughts raced. What did she mean by trapped? Who was threatening her? Was it the staff he had already seen mocking her, or was it something deeper? Something hidden beneath the polished surface of his restaurant. At that moment, another waiter approached his table, tall and arrogant, his smile fake. "Is everything all right, sir? Is the meat fine?" he asked. But his eyes narrowed as if suspicious. Alvarez nodded slowly, keeping his disguise firm. "It's good, thank you," he muttered. The waiter lingered too long, as if trying to study him, then turned away with a smirk, joining the others who whispered and laughed. The owner's jaw tightened. He had wanted to know the truth about how customers were treated, but now he had discovered something far more serious. Someone on his staff was suffering in silence, and the others either didn't notice or didn't care. Across the room, the young waitress returned to her duties. She carried plates with steady hands, but he noticed how carefully she avoided the arrogant waiter. She never met his eyes, always kept distance, like a bird avoiding a predator. Alvarez realized she must have been gathering courage for days to finally slip that note. It was not written in a moment of weakness. It was written in secret, planned, and desperate. Trusting a stranger dressed in rags more than anyone she worked with, he pressed his fingers against the folded paper in his pocket. The weight of it burned into him. This was no longer just an experiment to test his workers. This was a matter of life and dignity. When she returned to refill his glass of water, her hand trembled slightly. She leaned in just enough to whisper, "Did you read it?" Her voice so low it was barely a breath. Alvarez gave the smallest nod, his expression blank, but in his eyes she read understanding. Relief softened her face for only a second before she straightened and hurried away. The night moved forward, but his mind remained fixed on the hidden truth. He barely touched the meat on his plate. Instead, he studied the room like a silent judge. He saw arrogance, laziness, cruelty hidden behind forced smiles, and then he saw her, the only one moving with sincerity, the only one still clinging to kindness even while trapped. In his heart, two storms collided, one of fury at the staff who mocked and mistreated, and one of sorrow for the girl who had no one to turn to. He had built this place to be a home of respect, yet here was proof that under his nose it had become something else. He thought of tearing away his disguise right then, of slamming his hand on the table and revealing who he was. But he stopped himself. If he acted too soon, he might ruin her chance. She had trusted him in secrecy, and secrecy must protect her until he knew the whole truth. So he sat patient as stone, letting the night unfold. Every small detail became important, every whisper, every cruel smirk. Every glance toward the young waitress. The note had opened his eyes, but he knew this was only the beginning. The young waitress passed his table once more. Their eyes met briefly, and though no words were spoken, she seemed to beg him with her gaze, "Please don't leave me alone." And in that silent exchange, Alvarez made a promise within himself. He would not walk away. He would not let her cry go unheard. This night would not end with just a plate of meat and a folded paper. It would end with truth revealed and justice delivered. But for now he had to stay quiet, had to stay disguised. The real test had only just begun, and the weight of that hidden note pressed against his heart with every beat. The note still rested heavy in Senor Alvarez's pocket, but the weight of it was nothing compared to the sight of the young waitress moving through the restaurant, her smile polite but fragile, her step steady yet heavy with worry. Every time she approached a table, he noticed the same trembling in her hands, the same carefulness in her words, as if she lived in constant fear of making even the smallest mistake. Alvarez had always believed he understood people, but now he realized how blind he had been when he visited the restaurant as himself. Dressed in expensive suits, everyone pretended to be perfect. No one dared to show cruelty. No one dared to ignore a customer. But here in disguise he could see clearly the arrogance, the laughter, the sharp whispers behind her back. Two waiters leaned against the counter. laughing quietly as the young woman rushed to serve 3 tables at once. One of them nudged the other and sneered. "Look at her." Running around like a scared mouse, they laughed again, not caring that she could hear Alvarez's jaw tightened. He wanted to rise, reveal himself, and end it immediately. But he held back, for now he had to watch to learn the full truth. When she returned to his table, her face was pale, her smile faint. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked softly, her eyes scanning his face as if searching for hope. "Yes," he answered simply, but his gaze held hers long enough for her to know he had not forgotten the note. She nodded quickly and turned to leave, but in that brief moment he saw the truth hiding behind her calm mask. Exhaustion, sadness, and a kind of quiet despair that no young woman should carry alone. Minutes later, as she set a tray on another table, Alvarez noticed something small fall from her pocket, a folded piece of paper. She picked it up quickly, but not before he saw the edge of numbers written on it, perhaps bills, perhaps debts. Her secret life was bleeding into her work. When she finally returned to his table with a refill of water, he spoke quietly, his voice low so no one else could hear. "You are carrying a heavy weight, aren't you?" She froze for a second, her hand gripping the pitcher tighter. Then she forced a smile. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she whispered, but her eyes betrayed her. "You don't have to explain now," Alvarez said calmly. "Just know that I am listening." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but she quickly shook her head and moved away, leaving him with more questions than answers. Through the rest of the evening, he observed her carefully. He noticed how she flinched when the arrogant waiter passed too close, how she lowered her head when the manager barked orders at her, and how she worked twice as hard as the others but received none of their respect. Alvarez began to piece the puzzle together. She was not simply struggling with money. She was trapped in a place where her dignity was crushed daily, mocked by coworkers, pressured by management, and carrying a personal burden no one cared about. Near closing time, when the crowd thinned, he watched as she slipped into the kitchen for a brief moment. She leaned against the wall, pressing her hands to her face. Tears glistening in her eyes, she wiped them quickly before anyone could notice. But he had already seen his heart ached. This was no ordinary employee. This was a young woman fighting silently against a storm, and yet she still found the strength to serve him with kindness, to trust him with her secret note. When she returned once more to his table, her voice was softer than before. "Thank you for being patient, sir," she whispered. Then, almost too quickly to catch, she added, "I don't have much time, but if you come back tomorrow, I can explain everything." Alvarez nodded slowly, his eyes steady. "I will be here," he promised. She gave the smallest sigh of relief before turning away again, the manager's angry voice echoing from the back calling her name. She hurried off, disappearing into the kitchen as he sat in silence. Alvarez realized the test he had planned had turned into something far greater. He had wanted to see the truth about his restaurant, but what he found was a truth about humanity. Hidden suffering behind polite smiles, he rose slowly, leaving the plate mostly untouched, and walked out into the cool night, the folded note still safe in his pocket. Tomorrow he would return. Tomorrow the story would unfold, but tonight, the image of the young waitress wiping tears in the kitchen stayed carved into his mind, and with every step he took away from the restaurant, his disguise felt heavier, not just as a cover, but as a burden of responsibility. For he now carried not only the secret of her struggles, but also the duty to change everything. The night had ended, but the words inside the folded paper refused to leave Señor Alvarez's mind. He had read them again and again under the quiet streetlights, each line filled with desperation, each letter trembling with fear. "I am trapped here, my life is in danger, please help me." Those words haunted him as he walked home, his disguise clinging to him like a second skin. The following evening he returned to the restaurant, again in simple clothes, again invisible to the workers who only cared for appearances. He entered quietly, his eyes searching immediately for her, and there she was, the young waitress, moving quickly between tables, her smile thin, her eyes alert. She saw him, and for just a heartbeat her shoulders eased. When she came to his table, she placed the menu down with trembling fingers, whispering softly, "Thank you for coming back." Her voice was fragile, as if a single harsh word might break her. "I gave you my word," Alvarez replied quietly. "Now tell me what you could not say yesterday." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder where the arrogant waiter leaned against the wall watching her, his smirk cruel, his eyes sharp like a knife. She lowered her head and spoke quickly. "I don't have long, they are always watching me. But I had to tell someone." Her voice shook as she leaned closer. her words barely a breath. My mother is sick, she cannot work. The debts are crushing us. I borrowed money to pay for her medicine, but the ones I borrowed from are dangerous. They force me to give nearly everything I earn if I fail. They threaten to hurt her. Alvarez's chest tightened. The note had not exaggerated, her life truly was in danger. And the others here? He asked softly. Do they know? She nodded faintly. Some know they mock me. They whisper that I am weak. The manager uses it to control me. He threatens to fire me if I speak of it. I am trapped, sir. I cannot run if I lose this job. I cannot pay, and if I cannot pay, they will come for us. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she held them back, her dignity refusing to collapse in front of him. Alvarez sat in silence for a moment, every word striking him deeper than he expected. He had built this restaurant believing it was a place of pride and respect. But here sat one of his own workers, living in fear, suffering under cruelty and begging a stranger for rescue. The waitress placed a small folded slip of paper on the table, pretending it was the bill. This has their names, she whispered. The men who come to collect from me, I wrote it down in case you really meant what you said. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, but she quickly straightened and walked away before anyone could see. Alvarez unfolded the slip slowly. Inside were 2 names and a number scrawled in shaky handwriting. Men he recognized, men known in the city for their illegal lending and ruthless threats. His blood burned with anger as he slipped the paper into his pocket. The arrogant waiter appeared again, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the folded slip. Did she give you something? He asked sharply, suspicion dripping from his tone. Alvarez shook his head calmly. Only the bill, he replied. Keeping his disguise strong, the waiter leaned closer, his breath heavy with arrogance. Be careful, old man, she likes to play games. Don't let her trick you, he said before striding away, laughing quietly with another worker. Alvarez's hands clenched under the table, his heart heavy with fury. These were the very people he had trusted with his restaurant. And they were mocking, bullying, and crushing the spirit of a girl who worked harder than them all. When the waitress returned with water, he whispered softly, Do not lose hope. I will not let this continue. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of disbelief and fragile trust shining within them. She nodded once, quickly hiding her emotions behind a polite smile, and walked away again. The evening stretched on, every second testing his patience. He wanted to throw off the disguise, to shout at the manager, to fire the arrogant waiter on the spot, but he knew timing mattered. If he acted too soon, he might put her in greater danger. He had to wait to see the full picture, to gather proof of every hidden cruelty, and so he sat in silence, sipping his water, pretending to be no one, while the weight of her secret pressed against his heart like a stone. The folded slip in his pocket now felt like a spark, ready to ignite the fire of truth. As the restaurant began to empty, the waitress passed his table one last time, her lips barely moving as she whispered, Thank you, and though her voice was quiet, it carried more strength than any shout. Alvarez left the restaurant slowly, the night air cool against his face, but inside he burned with purpose. He had entered in disguise to test his staff, but now he carried a mission far greater. He would protect her. He would uncover the truth. And when the mask finally came off, justice would not be kind. Senor Alvarez walked home that night with heavy steps, the folded slip of paper pressing against his chest like a secret flame. The waitress's trembling voice echoed in his mind, her words about debts, threats, and the sick mother she fought to protect. Each sentence had carved itself into his heart. He had come disguised to test his restaurant staff, but the test had turned into something much deeper. He was no longer simply a curious owner. He was now a witness to hidden cruelty, a silent guardian carrying a secret no one else knew. The next evening he returned again, still in plain clothes, still invisible. This time his eyes were sharper, his ears keener. He was no longer only watching the waitress, he was watching everyone. At one table, a wealthy couple waited far too long for their order. The manager passed them twice without a glance. At another corner, 2 young workers ignored an older guest, laughing as he waved for service. The more Alvarez saw, the more his heart ached. His restaurant had turned into a place where respect was given only to money and appearances. And in the middle of it all, the waitress worked tirelessly, carrying trays heavier than she should, rushing to tables ignored by others, apologizing softly even when the mistake was not hers. She did it with quiet dignity, but her eyes showed the weight of battles no one else could see. When she brought him his meal, she placed it down gently, her hand brushing the table as if to steady herself. "I don't know how long I can keep going," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Sometimes I feel like I will collapse right here." Alvarez looked at her with calm but firm eyes. "You will not fall, not while I am here," he said softly. The words made her blink, a flicker of hope breaking through her exhaustion. The arrogant waiter appeared moments later, slamming a tray loudly on the counter, his eyes narrowing at the disguised owner. "Still here again, old man," he muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. "She must like you," he added with a cruel smirk. The waitress stiffened, her cheeks flushing with shame. But Alvarez kept his face blank, hiding the storm rising inside him. If this man only knew who sat before him, his arrogance would turn to ashes. But the moment was not yet right. Instead, Alvarez began to test the staff quietly. He asked for small things, a glass of water, an extra plate, simple requests that revealed who among them cared for service and who only pretended. The waitress always came quickly. Politely with care, the others dragged their feet, muttered complaints, or ignored him entirely. Every detail became evidence. Every cruel laugh another nail in the coffin of their false pride. The owner, disguised as a poor man, saw more in these nights than he had in years of walking openly as their boss. Later in the evening, when the crowd thinned, the manager cornered the waitress near the kitchen door. Alvarez watched from the shadows, the manager's voice sharp. "You're too slow. Customers complain. If you don't improve, you'll lose this job." His words were cruel, unfair, and untrue. The very customers she served often left smiling, while others complained because of staff who ignored them. The waitress lowered her head, whispering, "I'm doing my best," but the manager only sneered, "Your best isn't enough." Before walking away, she stood frozen for a moment, fighting tears, then turned back to her tables, her steps heavy but determined. Alvarez's fists tightened under the table. He could not allow this to continue much longer. Her strength was admirable, but no one should carry such a burden alone. The secret she had shared had become his responsibility too. When she came back to refill his water, he spoke softly. "You are braver than you know." She looked at him in surprise, her lips parting as if to argue, but instead she nodded faintly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. By the time the night ended, Alvarez had seen enough: the arrogance, the cruelty, the laziness, and above it all, the quiet suffering of the young woman who carried her family's future on her shoulders. As he left the restaurant, stepping into the cool night, he made a silent vow. The time for watching was almost over. Soon the mask would fall. Soon the truth would shake every corner of his restaurant. And when that happened, those who mocked and sneered would face a judgment they never expected. But before that moment arrived, he would prepare carefully, for when he revealed himself, it would not be with anger alone, it would be with undeniable proof, with justice that could not be denied. And so the owner walked into the darkness, carrying not just the weight of her note, but also the power to change her life, and the lives of all who had forgotten what respect truly meant. The city seemed quieter the next day, but inside Señor Alvarez's chest the storm only grew. He had spent the night replaying every scene: the arrogant waiter's smirk, the manager's cruel words, the trembling hands of the waitress who had trusted him with her desperate note. Now he understood that patience was his strongest weapon. If he revealed himself too quickly, they would hide their true faces again, and the truth would slip away. So he planned carefully. He would continue his disguise, continue his silent watch. But now each word, each glance, each gesture from his staff would become a test of character. Those who failed would be exposed, and those who passed would be rewarded. When he returned to the restaurant that evening, nothing seemed different on the surface. Laughter from tables, clinking of glasses, fake smiles from the staff. Yet behind the disguise he carried the sharp eyes of a judge. He asked the arrogant waiter for a glass of water. The man rolled his eyes, walked slowly as if it were a burden, and dropped the glass on the table carelessly, not even meeting his eyes. Moments later, the waitress approached, apologizing for something that wasn't her fault, gently wiping the table where the water had spilled. Alvarez noted every detail at another table. An older guest asked politely for assistance. 2 workers ignored him, pretending to be busy. It was the waitress again who hurried over, bowing slightly and serving with genuine kindness. Alvarez felt his chest tighten. She was drowning in her own problems, yet she never failed to show dignity. Later, when the manager barked orders from the back, Alvarez noticed the other waiters laughing as they shoved small tasks onto the waitress. She carried heavy trays alone, while they leaned against the wall. One of them muttered, "Let her do it, she's used to suffering." Cruel words that cut through the air like knives. She lowered her head but did not reply, her silence louder than their mockery. Alvarez's hands curled into fists under the table. He wanted to rise, to throw them out, but instead he breathed deeply. The time was not yet right. When she finally reached his table, sweat glistening on her forehead, she whispered softly, "Thank you for listening yesterday. No one has ever listened before." Her voice shook, but her eyes held a faint spark. Like a candle refusing to die, Alvarez looked at her calmly. "You are stronger than you think. But strength should not mean suffering alone." She blinked at his words, then quickly looked away, called back by another demanding voice. The evening stretched and the tests continued. Alvarez asked the manager a simple question about the menu. The man sighed impatiently, waving his hand as if he were wasting time. But when the waitress returned, she explained each item carefully, her voice soft but steady, her patience unbroken. For Alvarez, it became clearer with every passing hour. This was no longer just about saving her from debt. It was about saving his restaurant from the rot that had grown inside it. The arrogance, the cruelty, the blindness to human dignity. Near closing time, he watched a small moment that struck him deeply. A child dropped his spoon at a family table. The waiter nearby ignored him, but the young waitress walked over quietly, picked it up, and handed him another with a smile. The child beamed. The parents thanked her warmly. She bowed slightly and walked away, unaware that she had just shown more heart than anyone else in the room. Alvarez knew then that she was the light in this place, the proof that kindness could survive even in cruelty. And it was that light he would protect. When she came to collect his plate, she whispered again,
"I don't know why I trusted you, but I feel like maybe..."
"Maybe you're different." Her words trembled with uncertainty, but they carried truth. Alvarez leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "Hold on just a little longer. The truth will not stay hidden forever." She looked at him with wide eyes, a flicker of hope shining through the exhaustion. As he left that night, stepping once again into the cool, dark streets, he knew the moment was drawing closer. The mask he wore would soon fall, but not in anger alone. When he revealed himself, it would be with proof so clear that no one could deny it, and with justice so firm that no one would escape it. And so he walked with a quiet fire in his heart, the tests of character almost complete, the stage almost ready. The next time he entered his restaurant in disguise, it would be the last, for the time of judgment was near. It would be the last, for the time of judgment was near. The air inside the restaurant felt different that night. A strange tension hung in every corner. Señor Alvarez walked in once again, dressed in his simple disguise. Plain clothes, worn shoes, cap pulled low. But this time his steps carried a heavier weight. For tonight he would no longer remain silent. Tonight the truth would be revealed. The waitress saw him almost instantly. Her eyes softened as if she had been waiting for him. She hurried to his table, her voice low. "I didn't think you would come again," she whispered. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." Alvarez nodded gently, but said little. Inside his chest his heart beat steadily. He had carried the disguise long enough, and now the moment of unmasking was near. As he sat quietly, the arrogant waiter passed by, rolling his eyes, muttering under his breath, "There's that beggar again." "Wasting space," the other workers snickered, unaware that each word they spoke was sealing their fate. The manager appeared soon after, scolding the waitress for being too slow. "Do you think this place runs on kindness?" he barked. "Customers don't care about your little smiles. Hurry up," his voice sharp and unkind. The young woman bowed her head, biting her lip to keep from crying. Alvarez's fist clenched on the table. He had watched long enough, endured long enough. Now it was time. He stood slowly, pushing his chair back, his voice cutting through the noise, calm but filled with power. "Enough." The room grew silent. Forks stopped midair. Glasses paused on lips. Every head turned toward the disguised figure. The manager frowned, stepping closer. "And who do you think you are to tell me enough?" he snapped. Alvarez reached up, removing the old cap from his head. Pulling off the worn jacket and standing tall, the disguise fell away, and the truth shone in every face that suddenly recognized him. Gasps filled the room. One waiter dropped a tray. Another stumbled back in shock. The manager's face turned pale. It's him," one of them whispered. "Señor Alvarez?" The waitress froze, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. She had trusted a stranger, not knowing he was the very owner of the restaurant. Alvarez's gaze swept across the staff, his voice steady, strong, filled with disappointment. "I came here in disguise to see how my house was truly being run, and what I saw broke my heart. Arrogance, cruelty, laziness, and above it all, The suffering of one of my most loyal workers, the arrogant waiter stammered, his smirk gone. Sir, we didn't mean, but Alvarez silenced him with a raised hand. Do not lie to me now. I saw with my own eyes how you mocked guests, how you mocked her, how you treated this place as if it were yours to abuse. The manager tried to step forward, sweat glistening on his forehead. Senor, you must understand, she exaggerates. She brings trouble. Alvarez's eyes burned with fury. Enough, she is the only one who showed true dignity here. The only one who treated every guest with respect, even when carrying her own burdens in silence. His voice rose slightly, echoing across the room. And yet you crushed her spirit, threatened her, mocked her, used her suffering against her. The waitress's hands trembled. Tears welling in her eyes, she shook her head faintly. I didn't want you to be angry with me, she whispered. Her voice breaking, Alvarez turned to her, his voice softening. No, child. You have nothing to fear. You were braver than all of them. You trusted a stranger because your heart was desperate, and that trust was not misplaced. Around them, silence filled the room. The staff who had once laughed and mocked now stood like statues, fear written across their faces. Alvarez straightened, his presence commanding. From this moment forward, everything changes. Those who mocked and failed will answer for it, and those who stood with dignity will be lifted. His words were final, heavy like judgment. The waitress covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She could hardly believe what was happening. The man she had thought was just another poor customer was in fact her employer, the owner, the one with power to change everything. The arrogant waiter lowered his head, trembling. The manager stepped back, his voice weak now. Senor, please give us another chance, but Alvarez shook his head. Respect is not something you ask for only when caught. It is something you live every day. The customers in the restaurant, who had watched in silence, began to murmur, some nodding in agreement, others whispering about the courage of the young waitress. The truth had been revealed not only to the staff, but to all who had witnessed this night. Alvarez turned once more to the young woman, his eyes filled with quiet strength. You are not alone anymore, he said firmly. Your note has opened my eyes, and I will not ignore it. Her knees nearly gave way, but she steadied herself, bowing her head, whispering through tears, Thank you, sir. Thank you. And as the room stood frozen, the truth lay bare. The mask had fallen, the test was over, and the unmasking of Senor Alvarez had changed everything. The restaurant was silent, every worker frozen, every customer holding their breath. The weight of Senor Alvarez's words still echoing in the air. The mask of disguise had fallen. The truth was now laid bare, no one dared to move. The arrogant waiter stood pale. His lips trembling, he had mocked, laughed, and spoken with cruelty. But now the man he thought to be a poor beggar had revealed himself as the true owner. His legs felt weak. The smirk that once lived on his face now gone forever. The manager, sweating heavily, tried to step forward again, his voice weak. Senor, forgive us, we were only trying to manage. But his excuses died under the fire of Alvarez's gaze. Manage, Alvarez repeated, his voice calm but sharp. A place is not managed with cruelty. It is led with respect, with fairness, with heart. You forgot this, all of you forgot this except one. He turned, his eyes softening as they landed on the young waitress, still trembling near the counter, her tears shining under the warm lights. Come here, he said gently, his voice carrying kindness now. The young woman hesitated, afraid she might still be in trouble, but slowly she stepped forward, her head bowed, her hands clutching her apron tightly. Alvarez reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note, holding it up for everyone to see. This, he said, was not just a piece of paper, it was a cry for help, and it came from the only person among you who still remembered what dignity means. She has been carrying burdens no one should carry alone, yet even in her suffering she showed more kindness and respect than all of you combined. Gasps rippled across the room. Some workers lowered their heads in shame. Others shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to speak. Alvarez continued, his voice steady. From this moment, things will change. Those who mocked, those who ignored, those who disrespected my guests and my workers will no longer stand here. He turned to the arrogant waiter, his eyes hard. You are finished, the man tried to protest, stammering, but Alvarez raised his hand, silencing him. No excuses. Your actions spoke louder than words. Then his gaze moved to the manager. And you who used threats instead of leadership, who crushed the spirit of your staff instead of lifting them, you no longer belong in this place. The manager's knees weakened. He pleaded, "Senor, please, I need this job." But Alvarez's expression did not waver. "A job is not a license to destroy others. You had your chance, and you wasted it." The rest of the staff stood frozen. Fear gripping their hearts, they knew change had come, and there would be no hiding from it. Alvarez then turned back to the waitress, his voice soft once more. "And you, my child, you are no longer a shadow in this place. From tonight forward you will be lifted, not hidden. You have proven your worth not by riches, not by power, but by your heart." Her tears fell freely now, her voice shaking. "Senor, I only did what I thought was right. I didn't want to lose everything. I didn't want my mother to suffer." Alvarez placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You will not lose everything. You will gain. I will see to your mother's care. I will see to your debts. And I will see to your future here." The customers who had watched in silence now began to applaud softly, their claps growing louder, filling the restaurant with sound. They had witnessed cruelty turn to justice, despair turn to hope. The young waitress covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. But for the first time in months, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of freedom. Alvarez straightened, addressing everyone once more. "This restaurant will no longer be a place of arrogance. It will be a home of respect. Anyone who cannot live by that is free to leave now. For tomorrow will be different." No one spoke. No one moved. But the silence was heavy with change. The arrogant and the cruel knew their time had ended, and the faithful knew a new beginning had arrived. That night, as the last customers left, the young waitress lingered near the door, her voice quiet. "I don't know how to thank you. I never thought anyone would listen. I never thought anyone would care." Alvarez looked at her, his expression firm but warm. "Sometimes, the smallest note can reveal the greatest truth you were brave enough to trust, and that trust has changed everything from now on. You are not alone." She bowed her head, whispering through tears, "Thank you, Senor, truly. Thank you." And as she walked out into the night, her shoulders lighter, her steps steadier, Alvarez stood in the doorway watching, the note still in his hand. A reminder that behind every mask, behind every disguise, there is always a truth waiting to be seen. Behind every disguise, there is always a truth waiting to be seen. And when seen, it has the power to change lives forever. The test was over, the unmasking complete, and justice had been delivered. But more than that, a new beginning had been born, one where dignity would rise again, and where one young woman's courage would never be forgotten.